let's talk about country guitar. So you want to learn country guitar. Maybe you're already an advanced player in another genre, blues or rock, and you're just looking to add some country vocabulary to your playing. Or maybe you're new to the instrument altogether and the country style was kind of what drew you to guitar in the first place. Either way, this video is for you. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of country guitar and what I mean when I say that term, what country guitar even means. We're going to talk a little bit about the techniques and skills you'll need to develop in order to play this style effectively. We will talk a little bit about gear and what you may need, or spoiler alert, what you actually may not need. We will also cover what this style has in common and why it's different from other genres such as blues or rock guitar. And then lastly, we will actually get our hands dirty and learn a few country licks that we can take with us as we move forward on our journey. So let's get right into it. Country music as a genre, as a style of music, has been around for well over 100 years at this point. And it's used guitars throughout its lifespan. So the term country guitar is obviously kind of a broad category. So what I mean when I'm using it in this context is I'm kind of using it to describe the style that came to prominence in the 80s and 90s in mainstream country. It was Telecaster driven, fast-paced. There were certainly players prior to the 80s that played phenomenal guitar, but this was kind of when it really started to gain ground, that style. And there's certainly still players to this day who are carrying the torch and moving it forward. Guys like Brad Paisley and Keith Urban, who are phenomenal guitar players and who have still managed to incorporate this sound, this style into mainstream popular country music. Let's just briefly talk about some of the techniques that you're going to want to develop if you are going to effectively play this style. And just for clarification, the licks that I'm going to show at the end of this video will help to reinforce these techniques. They're kind of designed to utilize them and build on them. But just for demonstration, I'm just going to show you a few things really quickly that's kind of essential, necessary in order to really develop your country chops. If you're coming from another style, you're probably used to playing with a pick, but something that is not at all unique to country guitar, but that country guitar certainly uses, is the pick and the fingers in tandem. This is what we call chicken picking. All it means, it's another way of saying hybrid picking, which just means I'm using my pick and my fingers together. And what this allows me to get is sounds like this. So I'm picking, and then I'm using my fingers to pluck as well. The combination of the pick and the fingers allows us to get that snappy sound. And we wouldn't be able to achieve that if we were just using a pick. The other technique that you're going to get intimately familiar with is bending. Obviously you hear that all the time in country music. And like I said, we're going to learn some licks at the end of this video that we can start to use that will help develop these chops, these techniques. But that's just a quick overview into kind of two of the essential things you're going to have to learn if you're really wanting to develop this style. So you may think that you need a Telecaster in order to play this style of music. And I am here to tell you that indeed you do not need a Telecaster or a Telecaster style guitar at all. In fact, if you already have an electric guitar and an amp, then that's all you need to get started. Certainly the Telecaster is kind of considered the gold standard for this style, but it is not at all necessary. As far as amps go, Fenders and Voxes are normally considered kind of the standard for country, but as long as you have an amp that can have a clean sound, that's all you need. Okay, but you do need an electric guitar. So if all you have is an acoustic guitar, I would recommend getting an electric setup just so that you can bend strings. doing something like this. That's very hard to do on an acoustic guitar just because of the string gauge. They're a little bit thicker. So I know I just got done saying gear doesn't matter, but I would at least recommend a simple electric setup for this style. Country music as a genre has drawn a lot of influence from the blues, a lot of influence from jazz, and more recently from rock and pop music as well. So what makes this style different? What makes it unique? One of the main things you'll notice if you're coming from a blues or a rock background is we do something we call playing the changes, which is a jazz term. And all that means is that when the chords are changing within a song, we switch what key we're playing in, what key we're soloing in. A lot of times, especially as you first learn like your minor pentatonics, if you first learn the blues, they'll just tell you if the song is in G, just play the G minor pentatonic. In country guitar, that's not going to work so well, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that country is in major keys. And so in the key of G, right, we're playing a G chord. When when the song goes to a C, we're still in the key of G, but now we're playing a C chord. We're going to have to switch and start playing notes from scales that are centered around C. And I'll give an example of what all this sounds like in a little bit to kind of show you what I mean by all this. But that's going to be the biggest change for a lot of people who are coming from other genres. If you're coming from jazz, you're already very familiar with what we call playing the changes. But for those who have kind of more of a blues rock background, this is going to be new to you. And that's not to say that there's not players in those genres who can play the changes. There's phenomenal blues artists who do this all the time. It's not unique to country and jazz in that sense, but it's kind of a must if you're going to really dive into this style and get country guitar under your fingers. One of the similarities you'll see with country guitar and the blues is that the songs often follow the same structure. So in the blues, you have what we call a 1-4-5, which means if we're in the key of C, we're just using numbers to kind of match the musical alphabet. So C would be the first note in our scale, so that's our 1 chord. The 4 chord would be an F because we have C, D, E, F, which is our 4 chord, and then G would be our 5 chord. Sorry, I'm holding a pick here. So when you hear the term 1-4-5, that's all that's referring to. It's just referring to the first chord, the 4th chord, and the 5th chord within that musical alphabet. And this can obviously be transposed to different keys. If we're in the key of G, G now becomes our 1, and C becomes our 4th chord, D would become our 5th chord, because now our bass scale is obviously going to be a G. So you'll hear that all the time in the blues genre, and it's also very, very common in country music. So a lot of the techniques that we develop are developed around moving between these changes, moving between the 1 chord to the 4 chord to the 5 chord, and any kind of variation of movement between those chords. So what does this all sound like? We'll do this in the key of G. So that's just a common 1-4-5 progression, right? I'm going from a G to a C to a D back to the G. And in country music, our soloing, our guitar playing has to follow those changes. So a simplified way of looking at it, I'll play the same lick, but each time I switch chords, I'm going to switch the lick and do that in the new key of that chord. So if we're in the key of G again, it'd be, I'll do something like this. When we go to the C, and when we go to the D, and then we're back to that G note, G chord. Now don't worry if this sounds complicated or overwhelming. Changing keys while the band is changing keys can seem like a lot to try to wrap your head around at first. But you start slow, you take baby steps, and it's actually a very rewarding way of playing once you get the hang of it. So don't be overwhelmed. I don't want you to get discouraged thinking that this is way harder than other genres. It's like anything. You put in the right amount of time, and you eventually start to get the hang of it, and you start to get the feel for it, and it can be very rewarding and very fun to play. So now it's time to actually get our hands dirty and start learning country guitar. I know I talked earlier about what gear you need and don't need. Like I said, it doesn't really matter what kind of guitar you have, electric guitar and an amp. The one thing I would do is I would put it on the bridge pickup. So normally on your selector, it's going to be the one furthest towards the back of the guitar. On this guitar, it's selecting this pickup. The other thing we'll talk about is amp settings. Like I said, doesn't really matter what amp you have. I would just set it on a kind of a clean sound, so that when you're picking, if you're just picking an individual note, it doesn't really sound distorted or overdriven. But if you strum or hit really hard, it just kind of barely starts to break up. You just start to barely hear that little bit of overdrive kick in. And you can obviously use a pedal for this as well. If you have a super clean amp, you can have a pedal in front of it that is just adding a little tiny bit of overdrive that gives you the same effect. A single note picked is fairly clean, whereas if you really lay into it, it starts to break up and just distort just a tiny bit. So doesn't matter which amp, but just kind of get a sound that sounds similar to that, and you should be good to go. Another thing technique-wise that we can do to make something sound more quote country is you can play a little bit closer to the bridge, which is what we call kind of these saddles right here where the strings bend over. It gives it just kind of a little bit of a darker sound than if we're playing kind of more neutral out here. I use it kind of as an effect. I won't always play super close to the bridge, but I will alternate sometimes adding it into what I'm playing to kind of give it that more twangy sound. So for the licks we're going to learn, like I said, these are going to be super simple. If you're already somewhat of an advanced guitar player, these are going to be easy to learn. You're going to get them under your fingers in no time. But like I said, this is also kind of geared for people who are fairly new to guitar. So if that is you, the one, I guess, prerequisite or requirement I would say before you really start trying to jump into this stuff is I would make sure that you know just your regular chord shapes for just open chords, and then also have kind of a working knowledge, or at least a start of a working knowledge of the caged system, so that you can identify chords and what shapes they are in different places on the neck. I would also say if you're going to be serious about learning country guitar, start learning your minor pentatonic shapes and your major pentatonic shapes. Obviously there's a bunch of lessons all over the internet for both of these topics, so I'm not going to cover those here, but you can learn these licks. But as we go forward kind of in this series and in just getting more proficient at playing country guitar, that is going to be something that you're going to need to be proficient at, is major, minor pentatonics, and then just identifying chord shapes and knowing where to play them on the neck. So the two licks I'm going to show you today are based off of this, which is just a classic kind of steel guitar sounding bend. And so that kind of incorporates the bend we talked about, and a little bit of using that hybrid or that chicken picking. And then the other one I'm going to show you sounds like this. So don't worry, there's going to be tabs for this. I'm going to go into both of those in a little bit more detail, but I just kind of wanted to show you what it is we're working towards. Like I talked about, country guitar plays through the changes, right? So in this case, we're going to be learning these kind of based out of the key of A roughly, which means our first one's going to be in the key of A. Then we're going to come up to a D. come up to an E. And that brings us back to our A chord, which is here. So we're going to be kind of going through that 1-4-5 I talked about and applying each of these licks to their different respective chord and then tying it all back in with a lick that brings us from that 5 chord, which is that E, back to our 1 chord, which is that A. So like I said, if that seems like a lot, if that sounds confusing, the repetition of it, it will eventually start to make sense. I know it can seem like a lot at first, especially if you're not used to playing through changes and stuff like that. But as we get into this, it will make more sense, I promise. So let's go ahead and get started on that first lick. All right, so this first lick, I will show it kind of in the E shape, and then we will talk about how to apply it to any chord or any key regardless of what key we're playing in. So, and you guys can follow along, there's going to be tabs on screen, but I'm identifying where I'm starting based off of this E major shape right here, right? And if you know your cage system, that's basically just an A chord. But I'm playing it, I'm starting up on the 7th fret and barring on the 9th fret. And that middle note of that bar is my E. So I'm using that as kind of the target for this lick. When I'm playing through a solo, if I know, okay, we're playing over the E chord, I can identify this E, and then that's kind of my starting point for a number of licks that I can play, right? So for this specific one, we're going to start on that, we're going to hammer on, and then pick again, and this time we're going to bend the note up a whole step. And if you're new to bending, I'm not just using my ring finger here to really try to muscle that string up. I'm also keeping my pointer finger and my middle finger on the string kind of behind where I'm fretting and using all 3 of these fingers to help bend that note up. And then this is where that chicken picking, that hybrid picking comes in, is I'm picking that note, and then as it's bent, I'm holding it up there. I'm going to use my middle finger on that 12th fret of the B string. So now they're both ringing out together. And then we're going to do what it's called, it's basically a pre-bend. So that note, I've bent it up, I picked the higher string, now I'm going to pick this bent note and release it again. And then I'm resolving back to our E note. So altogether that lick sounds like this. And what kind of gives it that cool steel country guitar sound is the fact that those notes are ringing out together. We don't want to mute them or deaden them. Like that, it doesn't have the same effect as when you let them play together. So what's nice about this lick is, as I kind of demonstrated before, anywhere that I can visualize a chord shape, say I want to play A now, right? Well, here's my A chord. There's that A note. So I've just moved this pattern to a different starting point and played the exact same lick. And then if I want to do it on over a D, say we know our D is right here. Right, that's our D shape, we find our D note. So in the key of A, our 1 chord is obviously the A, our 4 chord is a D, and our 5 chord is an E. So I can start with it, playing it over the A shape. Then I know our next chord in the pattern would be a D, right? We go up to our E. Back to our A. So that's the first lick. like I said, you can apply that anywhere you want on the fretboard. Once you realize, okay, we're in this key, I just find that starting point on our G string, and you're off to the races on that. The second lick I wanted to show you is, it also works from any key, but it's what we call a transition lick, and we're going to use it to transition from that 5 chord back to our 1 chord, which in our example here, we're playing in the key of A. So like I talked about, A is our 1 chord. We go up 5 degrees of the A scale. We are on E, and now we're going to go from that 5 chord, that E, back to A. So it sounds like this. And why that works, if we think about where our E shape was, right? This is our E major triad. We're going to slide into that E, right? That's just part of our E major triad. And then we're just walking back down to our A. And why I want you to learn this lick, it might sound simple, but we're not using our pick at all till the very end. We're going to use our fingers to pick the strings. So those two, that first slide in, I'm picking once with my 2 fingers, picking again, and then I'm barring on the 5th fret, and then I'm going to hammer on from the 5th to the 6th fret on that G string. And then this is the first time I actually use my pick, and that's going to be to play our final note, which is that A. So the whole thing sounds like this. And we can use that if we're thinking about the 1-4-5 progression again. We'll start with A. We'll go to D. We'll go to E. And then we resolve. Like that. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of insight into what makes this style what it is, what makes it so fun and rewarding, what also makes it challenging. I do have more content coming out soon where we're going to cover some more kind of beginner style introductory licks, and then also some basic country solos that you can start learning and start playing. So stay tuned. Obviously, if you feel so inclined, you can subscribe and like the video. I appreciate all the support in that regard as well. But yeah, thanks for sticking around. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you took something away from this, and we will see you all in the next lesson.